You have played by the rules. You have swallowed your pride, have tossed at rock bottom, and maintained your decency when others play duty. So why does it feel life is actively punishing you for being a good person? It is a psychological paradox that breaks the spirit of millions. You sacrifice your peace to maintain harmonies, only for others to interpret your silence as weakness. You offer your absolute best to people who, the moment you stumble, turn their backs with a chilling indifference. This is the exact moment a deeply toxic seed is planted in the human psyche. The moment we begin to doubt the utility of our own keenness, we start to wonder if linguistry is a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. But let us pause and deconstruct this logically. The profound exhaustion you feel when laying awake at night, that invisible weight crushing your chest, is not the result of the world being cruel. It is the result of fundamental misunderstanding of how chaos actually operate. We often view karma as a cosmic vending machine, insert on good deed, immediately extract on reward. But reality operates on an agricultural timeline, not a transactional one. Consider the psychological experiment of the Zen master and his impatient disciple. When angry good people suffer, the master placed two seeds on the ground, one in fertile soil, one in a dry rock crevice. Months later, one was a lush tree, the other remained dormant. The disciple assumed the dormant seed was dead. The master corrected him. It is not dead. It simply lacks the environmental conditions to manifest. Human keenness operates on the exact same principle. We suffer because we make immediate ROI on our morality. We want our sincerity each for sincerity on our 1:1 ratio. But human nature is volatile. If your psychological stability is tethered to the validation of deeply flawed, ever-changing individuals, you are outsourcing your peace of mind to a highly unstable market. The individuals who survive the brutal storms life without become bitter are not naive. They possess a highly developed emotional intelligence. They understand that weaponizing the trauma by becoming cold does not protect them. It merely internalizes the damage. They recognize that peace is not an external metric of how fairly the world treats them, but an internal baseline how they process reality. Let's analyze the concept of transactional keenness. It's a deeply ingrained human flaw to perform a noble act with our hands while eyes scan the room for an audience. We sacrifice for someone strictly open as psychological ledger, recording a debt we expect them to repay. When that repayment does not arrive, or hurts turn to our eyes, we must ask ourselves a harsh truth. If our keenness evaporates the moment it goes untanked, was truly keenness? Or was it just a manipulative PR campaign for our own ego? The historical texts recount a moment when the Buddha compared a virtuous mind to a lotus blooming in a swamp. The lotus does not calculate its audience, it does not withhold its fragrance because the surrounding mood is full. It simply acts in accordance with its nature. When you require applause to be decent, you are hostile to public opinion. I want you to consider the psychology of the hyper-competitive individual. They may accumulate massive wealth, but they sleep with one eye open. Their mind's frantic war room of calculations, paranoia, and perceived slice. Contrast this with the profound psychological wealth of someone who had attached his self-worth from external outcomes. There is an immense, unshakable power in doing the right thing in total anonymity. When you secretly water a ding plant at midnight, and it blooms in the morning, the beauty is not diminished because your name is not on a plant next to it, but the ego has anonymity. The ego wants a billboard. This brings to a fascinating historical case study involving Ananda, a dedicated disciple who exhausted himself caring for the sick, only to be accused of doing it purely for attention. The accusation acted like a psychological splinter. When he questioned if he should stop doing good because of the misunderstanding, he was reminded of the lotus. If you are in pain because you are not recognized, your keenness is still entangled with your ego. Living well is not a performance for the gallery, it is the architectural foundation of your own self-respect. Let us shift our focus to a completely different, yet equally destructive mechanism, the weaponization of words. We lie in a society that terrifies physical violence but entirely reckless with psychological venom. A physical one heals in weeks, but a careless sentence can alter the trajectory of human life for decades. Think about it. You likely still carry a specific, cutting phrase spoken to you 10 or 20 years ago. It lies dormant in your subconscious, acting as a filter through which you view your own worth. In Buddhist philosophy, this is verbal karma, but in modern psychology, it is the planting of trauma. People will spend fortunes on health supplements while casually feeding their families toxic, degrading language every single day. They view themselves as good people because they donate to charity, completely blind to the fact they are emotionally bankrupting their own children. Consider the tragic dynamic of intergenerational trauma masked as top love. A father, stressed and ill-equipped to handle his own emotions, routinely calls his son useless. The son grows up and achieves massive professional success, yet consistently self-sabotages and refuses promotions. Why? Because the objective reality of his competence cannot override the deeply ingrained psychological programming of his father's voice. The father did not intend to destroy his son. He loved him clumsily. But love devoid of mindfulness, functionally identical to a weapon. Words are not just sounds. They are the source code we use to program the reality of those around us. When you argue, the logical content of the dispute is almost always irrelevant. What destroys the relationship is the attitude, the contempt, and the specific phrasing used to dismantle the other person's ego. A person with true cognitive discipline understands that silence is not a surrender. It is a tactical retreat to prevent mutual destruction. When you are angry, your brain is flooded with cortisol, shifting you into a primal state where the goal is no longer truth, but victory. Winning argument at the cost of a lifelong relationship is the definition of catastrophic strategic failure. Now, let us examine the slow-acting poison of resentment. We often hold on to anger under the illusion that it protects us, that it serves as a monument to how we were wronged. But holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It is an emotional hostage situation where you are both the captive and the hostage taker. I analyzed the case of a man who kept a draft divorce petition in his desk drawer for 10 years after his wife's infidelity. He refused to sign it, not out of lingering love, but because he believed keeping the marriage in a state of suspended animation was his ultimate revenge. He turned his home into a psychological gulag. His children grew up terrifying him. 10 years later, a blunt observation from friends shattered his illusion. The person who hurt you has slightly found a way to lie with it, but you are actively locking yourself inside a burning building. We meticulously curate museums of our own pain, dusting up our memories daily just to feel the sting again. We demand justice from the universe, completely ignoring the fact that forgiveness is not about absolving the perpetrator. It is about discharging the toxic debt from your own nervous system. You do not forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because your psychological survival depends on it. This inability to let go is deeply connected to another modern epidemic, the tragedy of different priorities. Specifically regarding our parents, we operate under the arrogant assumption of infinite time. We prioritize meetings, emails, and the pursuit of external validation, treating our families as static background that will always be there waiting. We tell ourselves, I will spend time with them when I am successful, but time is the ultimate depreciating asset. The aging of parents do not pause while we were empires. There is a profound, silent grief in achieving everything you ever wanted, only to realize the people you wanted to make the pro are no longer there to see it. We are exceptional at waiting for massive milestones while completely ignoring the micro joys that actually sustain human life. We seek peace in exotic retreats where ignoring the profound stability of a shared meal in a quiet kitchen. This brings us to the core malfunction of the modern human condition. We are experiencing a collective cognitive overload. We are physically present but psychologically absent. We were scrolling, we converse while planning tomorrow's agenda. We lie in bed while our minds run endless simulation of worst-case scenarios. We are hyper-connected to the digital ether but entirely severed from our own biological reality. Consider the executive who has opted every second of her day for maximum productivity. Get cries in her because she cannot remember the last time she actually felt a genuine emotion. Her mind is exactly like a Zen master's overflowing teacup. You cannot pour new inside peace or joy into a mind is already filled to the brim with anxiety, calculations, and the ghosts of past grievances. We treat the present moment not as a place to life, but as a tedious wait room for the future. And because of this, we are exhausted, not from physical labor, but from the relentless, grating friction of a mind that refuses to stand still. But what if the very mechanism you are using to seek exactly what is driving you to the edge of psychological collapse? To understand the true anatomy of letting go, we have to look at the one cognitive blind spot that almost everyone completely ignores. We operate under the delusion that morality is a transaction economy. We subconsciously believe that if input a certain volume of goodness, decency, or sacrifice into the social system, the universe is contractually obligated to upward recognition, gratitude, and peace in return. This is the transactional trap. We view our own keenness not as a fundamental state of being, but as currency utilized to purchase validation. And when the world defaults on that payment or sacrifice are met with indifference or, worse, suspicion or anti-psychological framework collapses, we do not just feel unappreciated, we feel cheated. This is the exact moment the mind begins to manufacture its own misery, turning genuine virtue into a source of profound bitterness, internal friction. The ancient texts, specifically the Dhammapada, address this exact psychological malfunction with surgical precision. There is a teaching that states the fragrance of flower cannot travel against the wind, but the fragrance of bruised person spread in all directions. It sounds almost poetic, perhaps too light for the cynical modern mind to immediately digest, but beneath the metaphor lies a brutal psychological truth. The scent of a flower is entirely subject to environmental conditions. It is at the absolute mercy of the wind. If your goodness depends on external validation, it is exactly like that floral scent, fragile, easily dispersed, and entirely out of your control. However, true virtue, the kind that enters the human psyche, operates independently of external weather. It remains embedded in the human heart long after the initial action has passed. We see this empirical data constantly. There are individuals who live their entire lives without applause, entirely enslaved by the masses, yet when they are gone, the sudden vacuum they leave behind forces everyone to realize the sheer magnitude of their presence. It is precisely like the subtle hum of electricity in a hose. You never notice the light when it is functioning perfectly, but the exact moment the grid fails, you are instantly paralyzed by the terrifying depth of the darkness. To understand the mechanics of this, consider a historic account from the ancient city of Savatthi. On a night characterized by relentless, quiet rain, Venerable Ananda paced the grounds of the Javana monastery. The atmospheric weight of that night quickly mirrored his own internal psychological state. For months, Ananda had taken on the grueling, unglamorous task of nursing the sick monks. He absorbed their physical suffering, listened to their despair, and managed the heavy emotional labor of caretaking. Yet, instead of gratitude, affectionate yoga monks began whispering behind his back, analyzing his motives, and concluding that he was performing his exhaustive duties to create a public image of benevolence. It was a seemingly insignificant piece of gossip, a lightweight phrase, but it lodged itself in his consciousness like a microscopic splinter. This highlights a fascinating human neurobiology. We rarely break from massive, catastrophic wounds. Instead, our psychological infrastructure is slowly eroded by the careless, throwaway phrases that loop endlessly in our own minds. Driven by this quiet agony, Ananda sought out the Buddha. He presented a fundamentally human question, one that every person who has ever felt betrayed by their own goodness eventually asks. If joint good is consistently misunderstood, is there any logical reason to continue? The Buddha did not offer comforting platitude. He directed Ananda's attention toward the rain, and then toward the lotus flowers with the pond. He asked a purely analytical question. Does the lotus bloom to extract praise from the worldly people? Ananda was silent. The answer, of course, is no. it simply blooms. Radial fraction is not performance, it is its fundamental biological and spiritual nature. The Buddha then delivered the psychological payload. If a person possesses kind mind, yet still experiences no suffering because that kindness is not recognized or applauded, then that kindness is still entangled in the ego. It is still a transaction. And that's realization in that moment the exact paradigm shift required for modern survival. Living decently is not a theatrical performance curated for an audience. It is an internal standard maintained so that when night falls and you are left completely alone with your own mind, you experience zero psychological friction, you feel no shame. This brings to one of the most darkly comedic paradoxes of human existence. The more sincerely you operate, the more rapidly you will be misunderstood, the more decent you are, the higher the probability that society will categorize you as a fool. We see this data play out every single day. A person causes a lot of suffering from financial ruin, and statistically, they end up losing both the capital and the relationship. An employee dedicates the absolute maximum bit to a company, operating with total integrity, only to be completely bypassed during the reward cycle in favor of someone who optimizes for visibility rather than value. The immediate, reflexive human response to this data is to become bitter. The ego constructs defense mechanism. From this moment forward, I will no longer be good. I will optimize for coldness. But analyze the mathematics of that decision. If you allow the sheer incompetence or ingratitude of individuals to dismantle your core decency, you are the one who absorbs the maximum collateral damage. The person who betrays you mildly occupies a fractional percentage of your timeline, perhaps a few years, but if you allow their actions to freeze your emotional capacity for the remaining decades of your life, enter a catastrophic miscalculation. You have essentially let temporary variable permanently corrupt entire operating system. In our daily interactions, this misunderstanding of kindness borders on the absurd. Consider a scenario where a young, physically capable man spots an elderly woman struggling with heavy groceries. He operates on a poor impulse of assistance and approaches her. Her immediate reaction is not relief, but intense suspicion. She clutches her back defensively, her nervous system interpreting his approach a threat. Assuming he is a thief, the young man, processing the absurdity of the moment, stands frozen for a few seconds before bursting into laughter, joking that he isn't quite handsome enough to pull off a hiss. It is a micro-interaction, but it provides massive analytical insight. The reception of your kindness is rarely about you. It is almost entirely dictated by the historical trauma and experiential database of the receiver. If someone has been consistently betrayed, their neuropods are literally wired to view unexpected generosity as trap. Their inability to receive your goodness does not invalidate the work of your action. It merely indicates that the environmental conditions are not at optimal for them to lower their psychological defenses. We can observe the long-term compounding interest of non-transactional virtue through the case study of a woman who spent nearly 20 years selling sticky rice under a bridge. The locals referred to her as Murra'ette. So, her routine was lessly consistent, waking up 3 in the morning, regardless of freezing temperatures or torrential rain, to prepare her food. Among her regular interaction was a young Shin boy. On days when his revenue was zero, she quickly handed him a hot box of sticky rice, framing it not as charity, but as practical necessity. How could he possibly work on empty stomach? The surrounding market vendors, operating strictly on profit margins, mocked her, viewing her actions as economically irrational, accusing her of performing charity while barely surviving herself. Murra'ette, so never engaged in debate. She simply smiled keenly and maintained her routine. When she eventually lost a significant amount of capital because she allowed too many desperate people to be on credit, the market consensus was that her operational model was foolish. Her response, however, revealed a highly advanced psychological framework. She stated that losing a bit capital is a recoverable metric, but developing a count cynical heart is a terminal condition. That single sentence forced ever around her into absolute silence. Just later, that same Shin boy, now an adult working as a long-distance driver, returned to that specific market sector only to discover that Murra'ette so had passed away from a severe illness. Her funeral was an exercise in absolute minimalism. There was no grand procession, only a few poor neighbors in attendance. Yet, standing silently outside that narrow alleyway that day was a massive, uncoordinated assembly of individuals. There was the man who received a free meal when he was unemployed and desperate. There was the woman who was allowed to carry a debt a few thousand when her family was starving. They did not deliver eulogy or perform theatrical displays of grief. They simply stood there for a very long time, anchored by the gravity of what she had done for them. It was a stark, empirical demonstration that the most powerful forms of influence are not broadcasted or monetized. They are the quiet, unrecorded interventions that literally warm up and sustain human lives. A person who has truly mastered the architecture of virtue completely divorces their action from the concept of exchange. They do not deploy assistance as an invoice waiting to be paid with a thank you. The moment you attack an expectation of return to your giving, you have installed a mechanism for your own misery. If your emotional equilibrium depends on the gratitude of others, you are outsourcing your stability to a highly volatile market. Today, they recognize you and your dopamine spikes. Tomorrow, they are careless and you plummet into despair. Your entire psychological state fluctuates wildly based on the unpredictable impulse external actors, leaving you as helpless as tree leaves swept up by the wind. Conversely, the individual gives without expectation operates on an entirely different frequency. They function like a burning candle. The candle's sole purpose is to illuminate the immediate radius. It does not require an audience to stand around and applaud its luminescence in order to justify its existence. We spend immense resources terrified of financial poverty, but we are completely blind to a much more lethal condition, a barren soul. A financial deficit can be engineered out of, capital can be regenerated, but an individual has entirely lost their faith in the existence of goodness, who views every interaction through a lens of cynical extraction, will find it nearly impossible to ever experience genuine peace again. This ancient wisdom frameworks never advocated for goodness as a strategy to acquire gratitude. They advocated for virtue as the ultimate mechanism tormenting the purity and structural integrity of your own mind. When your internal environment remains untoxic, your capacity for resilience, your blessings remain intact. A person who retains the ability to extend compassion to others never truly destitute. They might experience a severe deficit in financial liquidity or statistical luck, but inside their internal psychological grid, there is still light. Conduct a brief audit of your own behavioral history. Where was the exact last moment you executed an act of assistance with the deliberate intention that the recipient will never discover your identity? Analyze the neurochemical feedback of that specific event. It is incredibly light-istic. There is zero pressure, zero waiting for validation, and zero possibility of disappointment. It is the psychological equivalent of secretly placing a high-value flower on some dust and quietly vanishing into the night. That precise state of non-seeking is the exact frequency where human peace generated. The ancient codified this in a simple algorithm. When you execute favor, delete it from your memory. When you receive a favor, permanently archive it. Yet, the modern operating system runs the exact inverse of this code. We permanently engrave our own sacrifice into our mental ledgers, demanding endless compound interest, while simultaneously auto-deleting the assistance we receive from others. This cognitive distortion is the primary engine of our daily dissatisfaction. We are surrounded by individuals who exhaust their entire biological energy simply running a public relations camp for their own morality. They monopolize conversations with detailed spreadsheets of their sacrifice, endlessly listing who they have helped and what it cost them. They repeat this narrative with such aggressive frequency that their acquaintances have memorized their victimhood better than their own family histories. But an architect of true decency requires no marketing department. Think of the botanical mechanics of mango tree. The branches that are heavy with high-value fruit naturally bow downward toward the earth, while the branches that are completely barren stretch arrogantly upward into the sky. The higher the density of a person's internal beauty, the heavier the gravity of humility. They have calculated the ultimate equation. The metric of success, not the fluctuating opinion of the demographic, but the absolute stillness they feel when they look into the mirror at midnight. The timeline human existence brutally compressed. You are young, operating at peak physical capacity. And in what feels like a fractional moment, you turn around to find your hair turning half gray. The intense, high-stakes competitions you engage in, the desperate battle for status supremacy, will all inevitably disintegrate into dust at the absolute end of the timeline. The remaining asset is not the volume applause you manage to extract from society, but the precise quality of how you lived. There are people who dedicate decades to constructing a flawless, highly curated avatar for the public, only to reach their final years in agonizing isolation because the entire network was built on transactional utility, lacking a single thread of genuine sincerity. In stark contrast, there are those who operate beneath the radar, yet every space they enter experiences a measurable increase in warmth. When the timeline concludes, they are remembered with an intense, visceral gratitude, which is the highest currency a human life can generate. The fundamental law of the universe, impermanence. Fame has an expiration date. The praise you receive today will evaporate by tomorrow morning. The only variable that checks with you across the long term is the precise momentum of your actions, your karma. Every calculated thought of goodwill, every deliberate action of decency, is quickly writing the code for your future reality. You might look at current data and see zero return on investment, but concluding that your goodness is useless is a severe analytical error. It is equivalent to evaluating the efficacy of agriculture by planting seed at dawn and experiencing a psychological breakdown when there is no fruit to harvest by dusk. High-value outcomes require massive timelines to germinate. Therefore, if you are currently operating with high integrity but are facing severe misunderstanding, you must suspend your disappointment. If your decency is yielding zero appreciation today, do not rush to categorize it as failures. As long as you can power down your consciousness every night without the friction of internal shame, you are already in possession of an elite tier of psychological success. The immediate feedback loop lies rarely fair, but the long-term mix of cause and effect operate with terrifying precision. An individual who consistently input high-quality seed into the system will inevitably encounter high-quality outputs. It may not manifest as an influx of capital, but it will manifest as unshakable internal peace, an inner one characterized by relentless chaos. That peace is the ultimate apex asset. Eventually, after surviving enough signs of betrayal and systemic failure, you will arrive at profound analytical conclusion. The ultimate object is not to achieve universal popularity, because mathematically that is a statistical impossibility. The ultimate objective is to absorb massive amounts of psychological damage and still refusing to let it corrupt your baseline keenness. Is to walk through the absolute freezing temperatures of societal indifference and still retain the capacity to love. An individual who can maintain a poor operating system in an environment saturated with cutthroat competition is the definition of true strength. This strength is not derived from dominating or destroying the competition, but from a ruthless refusal to let the external darkness infiltrate and extinguish the internal light. This brings us to a highly perplexing anomaly in human risk assessment. We are hyper-vigilant about physical threats. We fear the visible laceration, the broken bone, the blunt force trauma. Yet, we drastically underestimate the catastrophic, long-term destruction caused by acoustic vibrations by words. A physical fault that scrapes the epidermis will regenerate within a standard biological week. A deep laceration to the hand, properly bandaged, resolves itself, but we all know that a specific sequence of words, lasting merely 2 seconds in the air, can embed itself into neuroarchitecture of another human being and remain active for decades. The ancient analytic frameworks correctly identify the human mouth as a zoo-use instrument. It possesses the capacity to be a blooming flower, but it is equally capable of being a highly sharpened scalpel. A precisely timed, shrilly sound sentence encouragement can literally reboot a despairing, suicidal psyche. Conversely, single, highly targeted phrase of harsh criticism can dismantle an individual's foundation of self-belief. Run a diagnostic on your own memory banks right now. Is it not an empirical fact that you still carry the exact phrasing of an insult delivered to you 10, perhaps 20 years ago? The person who was categorized as physically inadequate during developmental years will spend their entire adult life compensating for phantom inferiority complex. The child was repeatedly labeled as income will reach physical maturity but remains psychologically paralyzed. Entirely unable to trust their own cognitive output, these are invisible hemorrhages. They do not bleed on the outside, but they drop relentlessly like a microscopic shard of glass trapped deep within the muscle tissue. Every time the surrounding aura is triggered, the pain radiates through the entire system. These invisible destructions, the precise mechanics of verbal karma, is completely silent. It leaves no forensic evidence at the scene, yet it possesses terrifying capacity to incinerate an individual entire accumulation blessing before they even register the smoke. We operate under the dangerous assumption that our external acts charity grants immunity, completely unaware of the lethal leak in our own psychological containment unit. We observe this true value constantly in individuals who meticulously calculate their moral ledger. They invest heavily in external altruism, attending retreats, donating to foundations, volunteering physical labor, but then return to their domestic environments and systematically deploy verbal artillery against their own family members. The systemic inefficiency here is staggering, representing the exact thermodynamic equivalent of a person laboriously pumping water into a highly engineered reservoir, while completely ignoring the massive fracture at its base. No matter the volume of the input, the retention rate is zero. The hands are diligently sowing seeds of merits, but the mouth is simultaneously salting the earth. You cannot logically expect to maintain a positive karmic balance when primary mode of communication operates as destructive force. We see subjects who dedicate their entire physical existence to providing for their household without a single complaint. Yet, because their emotional regulation system is fundamentally flawed, they vent their accumulated friction onto their spouse and offspring. The tragic psychological output is that by the end of the biological timeline, their children harbor a deeply ingrained Pavlovian fear rather than love. Look at the behavioral dichotomy we exhibit in social versus domestic spheres. A man can be universally praised in his professional network as a paragon of diplomacy, yet function as a linguistic tyrant toward his aging parent behind closed doors. On a superficial levels, the fake holds perfectly, but applying the rigorous analytical framework of Buddhist causality, we must recognize that verbal articulation is not merely sound, it is active generation of karma. The ancient pedagogical system demanded a rigorous auditive speech and the underlying cognitive process that formulate it. Every syllable that exits the vocal cord must first be conceptualized by the mind. You cannot logically extract with nourishing fruit from a botanical structure possessing a fundamentally toxic root system. The ancients codified this in a simple metric. A bird of high cognitive function produces a clear, melodic frequency, where human of high intellectual and spiritual cultivation produces speech that is gentle and structurally harmonious. It sounds like elementary behavior algorithm, yet executing under pressure of real-world variables is extraordinarily difficult. Because when the human nervous system is flooded with the neurochemicals anger, the primal objective shifts entirely from mutual comprehension to total domination. Have you ever conducted a post-mortem analysis of severe interpersonal conflict? The data is remarkably consistent. What inflicts the maximum long-lasting psychological trauma is rarely the actual logistical content of the disagreement. It is the tonal velocity, the facial hostility, and the specific selection of weaponized vocabulary. A strategically delivered phrase like "you possess as a value zero" generates the neurological pain response that frequently eclipses blunt force physical impact. A label like "you are function useless" fundamentally rewrites the target's operating system. Cling to their identity much permanently, we observe a heartbreaking statistical anomaly in parenting. While vast majority of parents possess a genuine, biologically driven love for their offspring, they default to using highly corrosive language as their primary educational tool. They operate under the dangerously flawed assumption that achieve cognitive immaturity prevents term memory retention. This is a catastrophic miscalculation. A child's developing psyche is not a telom source, it's highly viscous, wet clay. Every single word dropped onto it leaves a permanent structural indentation. We are currently witnessing an entire generation of subjects rising in environments of absolute material abundance. Yet their internal emotional landscapes are completely barren because they have never ingested a single syllable of genuine validation. Conversely, simple, accurately timed phrases success you executed that perfectly possesses enough thermal energy to warm the entirety of human beings' developmental years. Consider a specific case study: a male subject in his early 40s. By our external socioeconomic metrics, he was an apex performer. He operated a highly successful enterprise, drove a precision-engineered vehicle, and possessed an immaculate public persona. Any superficial scan would classify him as radiating absolute self-assurance. However, during a casual dialogue, a colleague deployed seemingly harmless, teasing remark, "What kind of man is so fragile?" The immediate physiological response was startling. The subject's entire motor function froze. He descended into a prolonged, heavy silence, and the capillaries in his sclera visibly dilated with suppressed tears. In the subsequent debriefing, the underlying trauma was exposed throughout his developmental phase. His biological father had realized that is specific for as a disciplinary mechanism. The boy exhibited a natural crying response. That single sequence of words, weaponized through years of repetition, forced his developing brain to construct a massive, artificial psychological fortress. He spent decades forcing himself to project an impenetrable strength, systematically deleting his ability to find in others or process grief through tears. Society observes external armor, labels him a stoic warrior, but his internal architecture resembles abandoned, windowless concrete bunker. Words be classify highly potent biological seeds, embed them into a fertile, receptive situ with nutrient of compassion, and they generate a complex cognitive garden. Violently inject them with the toxins, distant, and they mutate into dense, razor-sharp thorns permanently embedded in the neural pathways. The historical but explicitly documented this phenomenon in the Anguttara Nikaya, positing that malicious speech inflicts a deeper, more fatal laceration than any bladed instrument. The logical deduction is absolute. An individual exercises rigorous quality control over the vocal output is simultaneously securing their own karmic assets. The masses hear this assume and dismiss it as a poetic metaphor, but under rigorous scrutiny, it reveals itself a fundamental law of psychological physics. The generation verbal karma operates at a terrifying velocity. Practitioners dedicate 10 consecutive years to meticulous ethical cultivation, accumulating a vast reserve of positive merit. Yet, single, unhinged eruption of verbal hostility can instantaneously liquidate that entire account. The parallel is exact. It requires decades of precise atmospheric and biological conditions to grow a towering forest ecosystem, but only a single, careless spark of combustion to reduce the entire structure to grey ash. We frequently experience where our internal pressure builds, and we carelessly vent few toxic silos to relieve our psychological tension. We then delete the event from our active memory, assuming the transaction is close, but the recipient carries the radioactive payload for an indeterminate period. They experience severe insomnia. Their cognitive loops obsess over the data. Their emotional sense register continued trauma. Decades later, they can still vividly recall the exact intonation of the insult, while the perpetrator's hard drive has long since been wiped. Historical archives from the Tang dynasty provide pristine case study of this mechanism. An elderly Zen master habited an isolated mountain hermitage, renowned for his extreme emotional regulation and highly economical use of language. One afternoon, a man severely intoxicated by his own anger breached the perimeter of the temple without any preliminary protocol. The man initiated a high-decibel verbal assault right in the central courtyard. "What kind of fraudulent master are you?" he aggressively demanded. "You possess a catastrophic deficit of human compassion." Any observer calculating the variable would predict an immediate explosive escalation. Instead, the Zen master executed masterclass in emotional judo. He remained entirely static, quietly processed a cup boiling tea, and precisely positioned it in front of the hostile subject. This lack of reactive friction caused the man's inner pressure to spike even higher. He amplified his volume. "Are you utilizing silence as a weapon of disrespect against me?" The Zen master maintained unbroken, neutral eye contact for a highly uncomfortable duration. Then, he deployed a single, socially precise diagnostic question. An individual attempts to deliver a package to your coordinates, but you actively refuse to accept delivery. Who retains ownership of the package? The man, operating on reflex, immediately snapped back. Obviously, the ownership remains with the sender. The Zen master allowed micro-expression, as my thought format stated. Hostile vocalization operate on the exact same logistical principle. The acoustic resonance of the courtyard brought to absolute zero. The aggressive subject experienced a sudden, massive cognitive reboot, standing paralyzed before his internal pressure finally broke, resulting in a violent release of tears. He confessed he had just engaged in a catastrophic verbal collision with his own son, launching a barrage of destructive words that caused the child to abandon the family residence for 3 consecutive days. The Zen master slowly lowered his gaze to his own callous hands, delivering the final analysis. Biological tissue can seamlessly repair laceration caused by forged steel, but the psychological architecture often spends an entire lifetime failing to repair the structural image caused by weaponized vocabulary. Processing that specific data point initially registers a lightweight observation, but it rapidly condenses into an incredibly dense, gravitational mass within your own conscience. Because if we run honest diagnostic on our own behavioral history, every single one of us has negligently discharged verbal shrapnel into the people in our immediate vicinity. The most mathematically absurd tragedy of a human condition is our skewed distribution of civility. We allocate our highest grade patience and our most refined diplomatic smiles to complete strangers in external socio-economic grid. But the moment we cross the threshold of our own domestic perimeter, we strip away our regulatory filters and detonate over microscopic logistical errors. Consider the standard corporate employee. They endure a brutal, humiliating verbal dressing down from the hierarchical superior, completely suppressing any reactive impulse to preserve the income stream. They then transport that highly compressed frustration back to their residential unit. Upon observing their offspring a minor kinetic error, spilling a glass of water, they unleash a disproportionate Category 9 emotional hurricane. The child stands there, physically vibrating with terror, while the adult rationalizes the outburst as standard disciplinary correction for a trivial mistake. But you must understand the neurology of a developing organism. The foundational phobias of adult humans almost always originate from these seemingly microscopic, asymmetrical interactions, sudden contraction of the facial muscles, a carelessly flung reprimand, a gaze devoid of warmth. The psychological canvas achieved is as delicate as a single-ply sheet of pressed paper. If you aggressively crush in your fist, you permanently alter its molecular structure, creating deep, chaotic creases that no amount of subsequent smoothing can ever fully erase. Truly comprehend the devastating half-life of these verbal isotopes, we must examine the document history of a subject named Nam, a narrative that consistently forces subject into a prolonged state of uncomfortable introspection. He was generally within a low-income, high-stress family unit where biological father possessed a severely compromised emotional regulation system, compounded by the relentless friction of economic survival. The father utilized the son as a grounding wire for his own psychological electrical storms, deploying devastating verbal strike every time the boy executed even the most microscopic, statistically insignificant error. You are as fundamentally useless as your maternal unit. Your future trajectory tends precisely zero probability of achievement. This was a specific linguistic algorithm the father deployed. Initially, the biological response of the child was standard: lacrimal fluid discharge, audible distress, and visible tremors. But as exposure to this hostile acoustic variant became chronic, the organism adapted. Nam simply bowed his head, initiating a psychological shutdown system to minimize the surface area vulnerable to attack. Paradoxically, his academic performance metrics were flawless. He was highly regarded by the education authorities and his peer group, yet he functioned like a botanical specimen growing entirely in the shade, biologically terrified of stretching his foliage into the direction light. Fast forward to his integration into the corporate air system, his operational capacity was undeniable. His logic circuits highly refined. When the SAT board identified him for a strategic promotion, a maneuver that would significantly elevate his socioeconomic status span his radius influence, Nam initiated a hard rejection protocol. He articulated to a board that his competency levels were insufficient for the parameters of the new role. External observers present severe cognitive dissonance. The objective data clearly indicated he was the optimal candidate, but the external data was irrelevant. Because deep within his neural architecture, the adult male was still trapped in a playback loop, continuously processing the audio file of his fat historical assessment. Years later, the biological reality of cellular degradation caught up with the father, confining him to a clinical facility. Under the sterile fluorescent lights, he maintained prolonged eye contact with his offspring before his defense mechanism finally collapsed into weeping. He stated, "I did not subject you to frequent physical kinetic strikes, but the probability is high that my vocabulary inflicts severe structural damage." Instead, Nam provided no auditory response. He merely executed a profound downward cranial tilt. There exists a threshold of psychological trauma where the conversion of pain into human language is no longer a verbal operation. It operates on the same physical principle as a metallic spike driven into a load-bearing wall for an extended duration. You can apply mechanical force to extract the object, but the structural wall remains permanently integrated into the architecture. The father in this historical dataset did not possess a baseline head for his biological output. He operated under a deeply flawed, aggressively clumsy paradigm of affection. But affection devoid mindful calibration innately mutates into a highly sharpened instrument of psychological laceration. This specific study forced a severe recalibration of how we perceive verbal karma, systematically dismantle the illusion of toxic linguistics exclusively reserved for hostile interactions with strangers in the public square. The most devastating verbal shrapnel is generated within the domestic perimeter, constructed from those habitual, sarcastic microaggressions we casually deploy against our own genetic lie, completely oblivious to the compounding psychological interest we are accruing. If you analyze the behavioral economics of modern civilization, you will uncover a darkly comedic paradox. Human specimens will allocate massive percentages of financial capital to acquire premium biological supplements, organic nutritional compound, and advanced medical intervention to optimize their physical longevity. Yet, these exact same individuals will not hesitate for a microsecond to dispense highly toxic, corrosive syllables, systematically dismantle the psychological immune systems of the people they share a residential unit with. You will observe subjects who strictly adhere to complex dietary restrictions, maintain rigorous attendance at spiritual institutions, and project an aura of profound enlightenment. However, the moment their vocal cords vibrate, they emit a stream of highly competitive, critical, and toxic frequencies. This behavioral model is a functional equivalent utilizing highly advanced sterilization protocols to polish the exterior ceramic or dining vessel, where interior volume remains fundamentally contaminated with biological hazardous waste. The ancient analytical frameworks specifically dictate that the oral cavity functions as the primary gateway for both the accumulation of positive systemic outcome and the initiation of catastrophic systemic failures. You can analyze family units that possess overwhelming financial liquidity but operate in a state of absolute emotional bankruptcy. The dining tables are laden with high net worth caloric intake. Yet the atmospheric pressure in the room is suffocating because the thermal temperature of their vocabulary is near absolute zero. Conversely, you can observe units operating on the absolute margins of economic survival, consuming the most basic botanical sustenance. Yet the acoustic environment is dominated by high-frequency positive radiation because the participants have mastered the technology of affectionate communication. If you conduct a rigorous observational study, individuals have genuinely achieved a high state of internal cultivation. You will note a distinct alteration in their speech velocity. They articulate their thought with deliberate, calculated deceleration. This is not an indicator of cognitive processing lack or psychological weakness. It's the result of profound understanding of linguistic physics, and after silo is a ballistic projectile. Once it clears the barrel of the mouth, the trajectory cannot be reversed, recount, or intercepted. How many catastrophic relationship failures have been entirely avoided if the subjects had simply implemented a 120-second cylinder period before initiating their verbal streak? But the human neurological system is wired to prioritize the adrenaline of anger over the clarity of awakening. This biological glitch is the root cause of the modern epidemic of digital severances, individual operating under extreme emotional distortion, text annihilation, proto-permanently executing relationships, and then enduring decades unresolvable cognitive regret. We witness subjects who, merely to secure a more tactical victory in a localizable skirmish, permanently sever genetic ties, refusing visual contact with their own siblings until their biological termination. When subjected to respective analysis, data clearly indicates that a temporary linguistic change at cost of a foundational human connection is an investment with catastrophic negative yield. Ancient analytical frameworks establish full non-negotiable parameters for optimized communication. The data must be objectively truthful, the delivery mechanism must be harmonious, the deployment must be temporally precise, and the net outcome must be beneficial. A massive percentage of the population operates under the catastrophic delusion that frontiers for universally positive metric. They prioritize the raw discharge of the internal data stream with zero calculation of the blast radius impacting the emotional receptors of the target. Deploying objective truth without the dampening feel of compassion is the clinical equivalent of possessing the exact pharmaceutical compound product to cure a pathogen, but choosing to pour it directly into a highly inflamed, unsterilized open wound. The chemical composition of the medicine is technically correct, but the delivery mechanism is so violently flawed that it exponentially increases the subject's pain metrics. A truly highly optimized intellect does not simply broadcast every byte of data process in the prefrontal cortex. It runs a complex filtering algorithm determining precisely what requires articulation and what must remain permanently encrypted within the internal hard drive. Consider the empirical divided by an elderly female subject whose primary economic function was the retail distribution of botanical matter in local market metrics. She possessed zero formal training in high-level philosophical doctrines, yet operational analysis of human interaction was devastatingly precise. She hypothesized that the human experience operates on the same thermodynamic and chemical principles as complex liquid suspension. If the sodium chloride concentration is too low, the biological reception is bland and unstimulating. If the concentration exceeds optimal parameters, the resulting toxicity renders the solution undrinkable. Only by achieving precise mathematical ratio of elements does the system achieve optimal utility. Human vocabulary operates on this exact chemical spectrum. A severe deficit of verbal oath creates a cryogenic emotional environment. An uncontrolled surplus generates high-friction kinetic damage. Only the precise deployment of calibrated slope tools, the optimal temporal junction, can elevate the temperature of target's psychological core. This subject then provides a retrospective analysis of her own historical data. During her early developmental phases, she operated with extreme volatility. Whenever her marital partner deviated from her established operational parameters, she unleashed a localized atmospheric disturbance of severe verbal aggression. Following premature biological termination, she ran a diagnostic on her memory banks. The final, most prominent data points she written were not the acquisition of financial capital or real estate assets, but the specific temporal coordinates where she deployed heavy, crushing linguistic payloads against her primary emotional partner. Her optical sensor displayed clear signs of vascular engorgement as she relayed this data. It is highly inefficient, yet seemingly unavoidable. This high flaw of the human operating system that certain data updates can only be installed after the catastrophic loss of the hardware. The protocol of maintaining verbal discipline is not designed to manufacture a flawless, synthetic human entity. It is an internal erring strategy designed to reduce the density of one's own psychological mass, thereby decreasing the friction coefficient of daily existence. Anti-aggressively broadcasting toxic vocabulary is, in reality, a system buckling under pressure of its own unmanaged internal anxieties. A system operating optimal peace rarely initiates unprovoked attack on external targets. It is the principle of fluid dynamics. Agitate a vessel containing highly filtered water, and it simply displays clean liquid. Agitate a vessel containing high concentration of particulate matter and sediment, and the entire volume instantly becomes a toxic, murky hazard. Therefore, the prerequisite for generating harmonious external audio output is the systematic decontamination of our internal psychological reservoir. An entity prone to rapid, explosive thermal expansion is almost always a structural container harboring critical levels of unvetted psychological pressure. An entity that habitually deploys sarcastic, Mocking algorithms is fundamentally operating with severe deficit of internal serotonin and baseline joy. Once this genetic reality is fully integrated, the logical response to immediately escalate or retaliatory redirect that energy into internal maintenance. There are specific temporal coordinates where the absolute cessation of audio output is the highest form of tactical compassion. This is not a cessation born of strategic surrender, but a highly calculated pressure indicating that further the transmission will only exponentially increase the mutual dynamic matrix. Have you ever conducted clinical observation of the entity engaged in a verbal conflict? The initial point of friction is almost always a microscopic, statically irrelevant logistical error. But as the volume of exchange vocabulary increases, the blast radius expands. The competitive drive to establish dominance overrides logical parameters, leading to severe structural damage to the emotional architecture. By the time the kinetic energy dissipates, neither entity returns the original regarding the conflict's origin. They only retain the highly toxic chemical signature of the trauma inflicted. Therefore, the operator who possesses the situational awareness to initiate a hard stop at the optimal moments demonstrates elite level mindfulness. Silence, in this highly volatile context, acts as a chemical fire retardant deployed directly onto a rapidly expanding psychological combustion event. It systematically drains the thermal energy from the system. True cultivation not quantified by the frequency of one's physical presence in designated spiritual facilities. It is strictly measured by the real-time processing and treatment of the biological entity standing directly in your immediate proximity. The capacity to override the ego and deploy gain frequencies to ailing parental units. The stamina to maintain algorithmic patience with newly formed human organisms. The iron discipline executed a total communication blackout during a spike of internal anger. These are the metrics of a highly advanced operating system. If your current financial liquidity prevents you from executing capital transfers to assist others, you must pivot the currency of psychological stabilization. Narration, the deployment of validating syllable, never what the vocabulary of recognition. What you perceive as microtransaction of minimal value might be the singular photon of preventing another anti-system from crashing into total darkness. The phrase confirming the operational execution will optimal possess enough psychological caloric density to sustain. Human beings will continue the biological existence for an additional 24-hour cycle. We must now shift our analytical focus to honor the most pervasive and silently ignored systemic failures in the human life cycle. There exists a highly specific, low-frequency sorrow embedded in the architecture of modern existence. It occurs when a biological unit allocates the absolute maximum percentage of its prime developmental energy toward frantic acquisition of caloric resources, protected textile hierarchical status, and external societal validation. During this relentless, high-speed forward trajectory, a catastrophic blind spot develops. The operator completely fails to monitor the rear-facing sensors, ignoring the two foundational entities who are quietly, inexorably undergoing the brutal physics of biological decay. Massive statistical majority of the population operates under a highly dangerous cognitive distortion. They run a simulation where parental units are permanent static fixtures in the environment, perpetually stationed at the coordinates of their childhood, immune to the degradation of time. But the fundamental law of the universe is absolute impermanence. The mathematical probability that today's visual or audio contact could be as a final data exchange is never zero. The data logs are filled with case study of subjects who initiate a standard audio transmission with their maternal unit at the beginning of the solar cycle, only to receive catastrophic termination notification before the cycle concludes. There are subjects who casually deploy the temporal promise confirming their return on the following day, only to discover that the construct of tomorrow has been permanently deleted from their shared timeline. Consequently, when we conduct forensic analysis of the psychological burdens carried by humans in their final stages of life, the dominant variable is rarely a deficit in financial accumulation or failure to achieve maximum hierarchical dominance. The overwhelming source internal toxicity is a relation that critical emotional data regarding the parental units was not transmitted before the communication window permanently closed. We must examine a highly classified emotional data set regarding a corporate executive named Tang, a subject whose operation metrics were flawless. yet whose temporal miscalculations result in a psychological devastation so profound it forces a complete reevaluation of how we define success. Tang operated at peak efficiency within the urban matrix, highly rated by his peers and generating a monthly financial yield that placed him in the upper percentiles of societal success. He possessed the optimal physical assets, luxury transport, premium real estate, and flawless professional trajectory. However, his maternal unit remained stationed in their rural origin point, entirely lacking the software to comprehend his corporate matrix or the complex data structure of his external success. Her primary operational desire was remarkably simple, a brief, daily auditory connection with her biological offspring. Tang, however, was perpetually running high-priority background tasks. He operated under the deeply flawed algorithm that transferring capital to her coordinates equated to a complete fulfillment of his filial obligations. During rare audio transmission, his mother inquired about the estimated timeline for his physical return to share nutritional intake. Tang, actively multitasking authorizing a corporate contract, deployed his standard deferral protocol, stating that his processing load was too high and suggesting they execute the visit on an unspecified future date. That specific deferral loop, like as though it another day, executed continuously for years without resolution. The system eventually crashed when navigating a high-stakes corporate negotiation. Received critical alert, his mother had suffered a catastrophic cerebrovascular accident, a stroke. He bypassed all standard speed protocols, driving through the night, experiencing a sudden, unprecedented spike in cortisol and absolute psychological panic upon his arrival at the medical facility. His mother's neural network possessed only enough residual energy to maintain visual lock on him for extended duration. Her final data transmission were weak, low-volume audio output. She stated she did not hold him accountable, would merely experience severe deficit of his presence. That was the terminal sequence before biological functions permanently ceased. Following the disposal of her physical form, Tang rebooted his daily routines. He continued to interface with corporate partners, maintain his sternal optical sensors, and execute his standard social algorithms. Yet, during the nocturnal cycle, he would activate his digital device and fall into a state of total paralysis. The absence of incoming communication requests from his maternal unit forced him to process a devastating reality. There are specific systemic losses that must physically manifest before a human subject can accurately calculate the magnitude of their own negligence. The human cognitive framework is notoriously defective in its variation protocols. We deploy massive energetic resource waiting for high-yield, complex variables to align, completely disregard the fact that optimal psychological stability happiness is actually encoded in the most basic default environment parameters. It sits within the standard configuration of sharing with fully operational parental units. The specific acoustic frequency of a mother initiating the dinner sequence, or the allocated time frame to process the historic data actually transmitted by father. While these assets are active and available, the human brain classifies them as background noise. Once they are permanently deleted from the environment, they instantly convert into assets of infinite value, unpurchasable by any volume global currency. Million units left long expeditions to the fresh coordinates the socio-political map seeking a construction called peace, entirely oblivious to the fact that peace was previously localized in low-tech kitchen environment, embedded in the olfactory data of the daily rice preparation. Subjects burn their finite biological you attempting to validate their market worth to a highly indifferent global network, forgetting that parental units never program such aggressive success meet to their core requirements. The optimal success parameters parents hold their offspring as shockingly minimal. They do not require the acquisition of massive real estate portfolios or the achievement of supreme financial dominance. Their primary directive is simply that the child maintains adequate sleep cycles, executes regular nutritional intake address to ethical behavior algorithms, and avoids catastrophic systemic failures. The architecture of parental love is extraordinarily ordinary. Yet the majority of human subjects only decode this reality during the terminal phases of their lifespan. The ancient thermodynamic observation remains barely accurate, the biolocatry recurs stasis. But the atmospheric wind refuses to cease, the offspring finally acquires the resource to nurture. But the parent units have expired. This is not mere poetic data. It is universal psychological trauma recorded across the entire human species. We observe subjects who minimize contact during the operational phase of their parents, only to spend as clutching two-dimensional visual representations, leaking ocular fluid in a state of perpetual system error. We document cases where offspring refuse to allocate processing power to listen to a healthy father's data streams, only to experience desperate, unfulfilled craving to hear that specific vocal frequency just on more time after his termination. The human psychological matrix is most severe structural damage when forced to process the conditional variable if only the subject had optimized their schedule to reduce negligence. If only the written sequence to the origin point had been initiated earlier. If only the protocol for a short, forced meal had been executed. But the temporal dimension is strictly unidirectional. Deleted timelines cannot be restored from a backup server. The universe possesses no mechanism for if only. Therefore, where the biological hardware still functions, emotional transmission must be instantaneous. When the capacity to care remains online, time must not be hoarded. The mere presence of parental units in the current operational environment is a massive statistical anomaly of good fortune that millions other subjects no longer possess. Consider the historical data logs regarding Albert Einstein. When analyzing the variable that produced his unparalleled cognitive output, Einstein himself isolated the primary catalyst, not his inherent neurological architecture, not his advanced scientific computations, but his maternal unit. During his initial developmental phases, his processing speed was categorized as severely substandard by educational authorities, generating negative diagnostic data. Yet, his mother refused to accept his classification. She continuously avoided positive reinforcement algorithms, insisting that his unique processing methodology would eventually yield optimal results. That specific frequency of unconditional maternal love stabilized a neural network that the external environment had classified as defective. Decades later, operating as globally recognized scientific entity, Einstein maintained the value provided by his mother as highest valued physical asset. He hypothesized that without the foundational maternal programming, the entity known as Einstein would not have successfully compiled. This data proves that parental units do not require vast financial reserves or advanced academic programming to ensure their upbringing success. Their unconditional emotional output serves as the structural bedrock supporting the entire lifespan of the child. When navigating high-stress environmental storms, the ultimate survival mechanism is not raw intellectual talent, but the absolute certainty that a secure, unconditional emotional basis somewhere in the global network. The Buddha's analytical framework identifies philopathia as the root algorithm for compassionate output. A subject who maintains the capacity to acknowledge the immense biological and energetic depth of their creation possesses highly functional, non-corrupted neural state. Showing philopathia does not require waiting for optimal financial conditions, supreme societal status. The required inputs are micro-actions, a brief auditory check-in, a shared caloric intake, a period of sustained attention without the interference of digital device, a physical tactile connection during their biological decline. As parental units degrade, their requirement for material assets drops to near zero, replaced entirely by the need for emotional validation and relevance. The ultimate paradox of human maturation is the realization that regardless the distance traveled, the volume of external entities encountered, or the societal value accumulated, the only coordinates that provide true systemic peace at the point of origin. It is the low lumen light left active by the mother during the nocturnal cycle. The minor acoustic anomalies of father's scope in the primary structure, and the profound relief existing without the requirement to execute performance algorithm. The external market values human units strictly for their utility and output. The family unit values the subject simply for existing as the biological derivative. That love requires no transaction, no performance metrics, and no return on investment. Therefore, if your parental units remain active in your current timeline, you must optimize your data collection at every available moment. Do not wait until you are stationed before a static memory interface to initiate an emotional data transfer that can no longer be received. Do not let your filial obligations be reduced to the delayed combustion of incense sticks. Decelerate your operational speed. reduce your networking events, and optimize your work hours to allocate processing time for your parents. Ultimately, the metric for a successful human lifespan is not the final balance of the financial ledger, but the volume of love distributed to primary connections while the system was still online. Looking back at the trajectory of your existence, you will realize the ultimate systemic victory was not the accumulation of property or status, but the successful execution of protocols that prevented your creators from experiencing isolation in their final operational cycles. However, comprehensive diagnostic human fatigue reveals that the primary source of system drain is rarely access to external labor or resource scarcity. The catastrophic lost energy stems from the massive background processing power wasted on unresolved internal conflicts, such as how corrupted emotional data from decades ago, and the slightest environmental trigger, a single careless phrase causes the system to experience the exact same pain parameters the day the trauma was initially recorded. Entities who exited or operational radius years ago remain permanently cached in our memory drives, functioning like a microscopic foreign object embedded deep beneath the demo layer, invisible to optical sensors but generating a continuous smoldering pain signal. We operate under the cognitive illusion that maintaining this data prevents future breaches, utilizing anger as a defensive firewall, but longitudinal analysis reveals catastrophic flaw in this logic. The entity that initiated the damage has slightly cleared the cache and moved on to a peaceful operational state long ago. We are the only ones locking ourselves inside the quarantine zone of our own past. Reaching to initiate the exit sequence, the Buddha accurately modeled this psychological glitch, stating that holding on to anger is the equivalent of grasping a high-temperature carbon fragment with the intent of launching it at a target. The primary and most severe thermal damage is sustained by the hand holding the object. While this appears to be a basic analogy, deep reflection reveals it a flawless mapping human physiological response. When we execute the anger algorithm against another subject, we are the ones who experience sleep cycle disruption, elevated cardiovascular, appetite suppression, and total systemic instability. Meanwhile, the target entity may continue to execute the daily routines, outputting positive social interaction as if no conflict ever occurred. By maintaining this state, we are essentially hijacking another entity's negative output and seeing it to perpetually torture our own hardware. A highly illuminating data involves a man subject who transmits his operational history to Buddha's teachings channel. He had maintained a steady active hostility toward his biological brother for over 20 solar cycles, triggered by a minor discrepancy in the allocation of irradiated territorial assets. These two unique shared identical origin points share sleeping coordinate on a single bamboo construct, execute highly cooperative survival strategies involving the division of basic carbohydrates, and navigated adverse weather conditions to get or extract protein from the local environment. Yet, fractional misallocation that reclassify them as hostile entities. They execute avoidant protocol when their physical trajectory intersected, actively diverting their optical sensors during mandatory annual memorial gatherings for their creators. They maintain maximum physical distance at opposite ends of the nutritional intake surface, generating zero audio transmission. The environmental tension was so dense it disrupted the cycle of equilibrium on surrounding observers. When a newly generated unit, the nephew bypassed the adult filters and directly queried the subject about the estimated termination of this hostility toward his father, the subject's processing unit stalled. After a prolonged silence, he outputted a deeply tragic string of data. "I don't know either." This simplifies how human units can run a backgrounder program for an entire lifespan, completely thwarting the original execution command, only registering the massive permanent drag on the system resources. The Buddha classified anger as one of the three critical systemic poisons, along with greed, ignorance. An angry subject functions identically to an uncontained thermal even within a structure. When the fire initiates, the primary casualty is not an external target, but the structure itself. Observe the physiological metrics. Angry subject ocular tension increases, acoustic frequencies become harsh and distorted, cardiovascular output spike erratically, and respiratory rate become critically unstable. The ancient diagnostic remains flawless. Thermal spikes in the emotional core inevitably lead to catastrophic logic failures. A single microseconds bypass impulse control can generate a string of toxic data that permanently corrupts a lifetime of relationships. There are documented cases where a single insulting phrase, deployed during a temporary thermal anomaly, severed biological alliances for decades. A minor thermal event, if not suppressed early, will incinerate an entire biome. Anger operates on the exact same physics. If permanently stored in internal drive, it does not merely damage external targets, but completely incinerates the subject's own baseline peace. To illustrate the optimal defensive protocol against toxic emotional transfers, we must analyze a highly specific, historical, and involving diverse behavioral algorithms. One morning, as his son Nathan executed his standard gathering and arms collection route through a local settlement, a highly volatile subject breached the perimeter and initiated a maximum volume verbal assault. The subject's biological measures were redlining vascular protrusion in the cervical region, uncontrolled salivary expulsion, and maximum decibel output. He targeted the butt with barrage hostile accusations, charging him with executing malicious subroutines that corrupted the village's social matrix. His own biological offspring tore several network ties with the family unit. The surrounding nodes in the social cluster immediately heightened their defensive protocols, anticipating a mass kinetic or verbal collision. Yet, the S1's behavioral algorithm remained entirely undisturbed. His optical sensors registered the event with the absolute zero variant stability of a frictionless liquid surface. He simply allowed the hostile subject to exhaust his localized energy reserves, waiting patiently for the audio op to terminate. Once the aggressive data stream ceased, the butler deployed perfectly calibrated counter-inquiry. AI unit attempts to transfer the packet or a physical asset to another, but the receiving node refuses to acknowledge or accept the transfer protocol to whom just that asset belongs. The hostile subject, processing the logic gate, instantly responded. It remains in the inventory of the originating unit. Obviously, the butler's facial mirror expression shifted to a state of being in equilibrium as he delivered the ultimate systemic override. I do not accept your anger. That single string of code executed total system freeze across the entire crowd. The aggressive subject stood paralyzed, his cognitive architecture caught in an infinite loop as he was forced, perhaps for the first time in his operational history, to process his own reflection in the mirror of absolute neutrality. This catastrophic failure of his standard conflict engagement protocol resulted in a sudden pressure release. His optical units detonated a spontaneous stir production sequence, dropping his physical chassis to the ground. He confessed that his entire operational lifespan had been governed by anger, and he had never encountered a system that did not mirror his hostility. The Buddha assisted the subject in recalibrating his physical stance and delivered a diagnostic truth. The unit that suffers primary thermal damage from the fire of rage is always the unit currently storing the combustible material. Analyzing this sequence, one must dismantle the flawed assumption that the bird's optimal peace was hardware limitation and inability to process sorrow or lack emotional sensors. On the contrary, his efficiency stemmed from a superior data management architecture. He understood that the emotional output and external node is the exclusive property of that node. If you do not initiate the download protocol, the malicious payload cannot execute within your own environment. It is the equivalent of corrupted file being left on your physical doorstep. If you voluntarily pick it up, extract it, and install it into your core directory, you are the sole architect of your subsequent system crash. A highly optimized individual is not who operates in a sterile vault free from incoming attacks, but on whose firewall prevents those attacks from writing the foundational code. Yet, standard human units operate on a profoundly flawed data retention model. They frequently transmit audio signals claiming a desire for baseline peace, while simultaneously allocating massive sectors to internal memory to a meticulously encrypted ledger of emotional grievances. Every minor deviation from their expectations logs. Every harsh frequency emitted by another unit is permanently archived. There are units currently utilizing prime cognitive bandwidth to store the data a neighboring unit failing to return. Borrowed cooking implement a full decade prior. They maintain this flawless archival database of trivial offenses. Yet this rigorous data collection yields zero optimization in their resource acquisition. It merely accelerates the degradation of their physical hardware. This reveals critical paradox in human operating systems. The external node that initiates the damage frequently deletes the event log entirely, where the victim node sets the file to read only and runs it as a permanent background process. There are nocturnal cycles where units remain in a state of high alertness simply because the processor is looping an obsolete phrase. There are substitute traverses of familiar geographic coordinate and experience a severe rub in the emotional telemetry, simply because the location triggers the retrieval of a corrupted memory file from multiple cycles ago. We operate under the flawed logic that we are maintaining an internal justice protocol, but in reality, we are merely excavating a deeper structural void within our own cognitive framework. The incented one's analytical framework posits that our phenomena are subject to impermanence. Positive data spikes will eventually normalize, and negative data spikes are subject to the exact same decay rate. However, the human processing unit exhibits a highly irregular sorting mechanism. Joyful inputs frequently flush from the cache with alarming speed, whereas painful inputs are transferred to deep, long-term storage. Is the algorithm equivalent receiving 10 highly optimized nutritional units and immediately deleting the acquisition log, but receiving a single toxic compound ring analysis on it for the duration of the solar cycle? The human frequently functions as a highly efficient non-stick surface for positive inputs, yet acts as an industrial-grade asset safe for negative data. Consider Adino's report submitted by a female unit regarding familiar network for 15 solar cycles. She maintained a high-intensity hostility program directed at her mother-in-law. The origin of this massive resource drain, a single, uncalibrated audio output during initial integration into the family unit, where her culinary processing skills were critical. She isolated that single string of data, encrypted it, and stored it in her core emotional drive. Every time she retrieved that file, she initiated a self-sabotage protein, which subsequently generated secondary hostile outputs directed at her own parent unit and biological offspring. She allowed this single data fragment to dictate her operational mood while execute routine maintenance tasks, often running the file until her optical sensors leak, continuing this pattern till the mother-in-law unit permanently powered down. During the subsequent physical asset liquidation of the deceased unit, the female discovered a localized analog storage device notebook within its pages. She decoded a string of handwritten text generated by the retarget her decade and half long hostility. The text read, "The incoming is currently inefficient in localized tasks but possess a highly optimized core morality. In future cycles, she will undoubtedly provide maximum care for parent unit and offspring." Processing this contradictory data caused an immediate and violent system crash. The female unit initiated massive emotional purge. The algorithmic truth was undeniable. The mother-in-law had never run a hostility program against her. The initial critique was merely a transient processing error, a careless output during a temporary thermal spike. Yet the female unit had chosen to download it, verify it, and let it define half her operational lifespan. How many units within the current global network are executing this exact same catastrophic error? The systemic degradation we experience is rarely caused by the initial kinetic or verbal impact. It is almost entirely generated by the duration for which we choose to host the corrupted file. The border that executing a forgiveness protocol is not concession of network dominance to the offending node. It is not an admission of structural weakness, nor is it a transfer of resources to the enemy. Forgiveness is, strictly speaking, a self-preservation override. Is the immediate deletion of a massive, unoptimized background process that has been consuming RAM for years. The first system to experience an immediate upgrade in processing speed and thermal cooling is the one that initiates the deletion. Units that refuse to purge these files frequently experience catastrophic hardware failures. The constant running of anger algorithms elevates internal pressure metrics, leading to cardiovascular instability simply because the unit insists on retrieving data from a past cycle every time it boots up. There are subjects whose baseline state upon exiting sleep mode is already at maximum CPU load. Their internal architecture exhausts before the daily cycle even begins. Anger is not merely a software glitch, it physically degrades the chassis. Ancient diagnostic manuals correctly identified that prolonged software corruption needed to be manifest hardware decay. core drive saturated with repeated resentment, even if housed within a premium, high-security store perimeter would never achieve operational equilibrium. To further analyze this self-destructive programming, we must examine the case study of a unit designated as Quân. By our external metrics, Quân was a highly optimized, functional node, reliable, productive, and executing his familiar protocols flawlessly. However, he subsequently detected critical security breach. His parent unit had initiated an unauthorized connection with an external node. This betrayal of the network consensus caused a near total collapse of his operational stability. Rather than executing a clean severance protocol, he chose to maintain the compromised network link, transforming his primary operational base into a containment zone. The communication between the two nodes dropped to absolute zero. The ambient environment during energy replenishment cycles became dense with unexpressed hostility, creating a severe localized pressure differential. For an entire decade, would maintain a fully compiled network severance, document a divorce petition in physical storage, refusing to execute the final signature command. This delay was not driven by residual attachment algorithms, but by a highly toxic Venn subroutine. He calculated that maintaining the corrupted network in a state of perpetual degradation was the optimal method for punishing the offending node. He weaponized his own structural integrity. Yet, rigorous data analysis reveals that the primary casualties of this strategy were his own system internally spun biological unit within the network. When localized thermal regulation failed, he began emitting decibel hostile outputs over environmental variables, such as the junior unit mission link elite container. The critical failure of his strategy was locked when the junior unit transmitted a low frequency audio signal to the female node. Me-Fi metrics regarding the primary male unit currently exceed me-attachment metrics. This specific string of data represents the ultimate catastrophic failure of parental algorithm. The turning point in Quen's operational history occurred during a data exchange sequence with a legacy node, a medical diagnostic technician. After doubling Quen's decade-long error log, the technician delivered a highly compressed, maximum impact string of logic. The node had initiated just structural damage, largely recalibrated, and achieved baseline peace multiple cycles ago. You are the only unit actively maintaining the firewall on your own localized trauma. During the subsequent node-to-node cycle, as external environmental precipitation impacted his store perimeter, when initiated deep dive diagnostic, he retrieved the yellowing, physically degraded severance document from storage. The subsequent emotional pulse war triggered by residual hostility toward the female unit, but by the devastating realization that for 10 solar cycles, the architect of his maximum suffering was his own central processing unit. He had permitted a single external security breach to write his entire operational mandate. He was functioning as a unit that intentionally embedded a physical hazard into its own chassis, and then continuously transmit error reports blaming external environment for the resulting structural damage. Vast percentage of global population operates under this exact same flawed architecture without triggering any self-awareness protocols. They do not allocate processing power to the current temporal coordinate. Instead, they operate as curator localized museum dedicated entirely to corrupted data and painful archives. Every single daily cycle, they retrieve his own files, run them through an enhancement algorithm, and force the systems to experience the simulated damage all over again. But historical data equivalent to fluid dynamics owns a volume of liquid have bypassed a structural checkpoint. It cannot be reversed. A unit can remain at the checkpoint and spend infinite energy in sorrow, but the specific molecular arrangement of that water is permanently inaccessible. The only mathematically viable operation is to calculate the forward trajectory. Executing a letting go protocol does not require a total wipe of the memory drive. There are specific trauma files that are permanently burned into the ROM. Letting go is simply the administrative decision to revoke those file executable permissions. They remain in the archive, but they are no longer allowed to dictate current emotional opus or alter the trajectory of a physical chassis. It is an decomposite vulnerability in the outer casing. The structural anomaly is visible, but it no longer triggers pain response when scanned. A highly optimized unit is not on that has never sustained a kinetic or database attack, but on that, having processed the damage, actively deploys firewalls to ensure they do not transmit damage to adjacent nodes. This requires processing power, but it is the pinnacle operational beauty. A unit that has sustained damage frequently develops a flag algorithm that automatically inflicts damage others, a primitive defense. No task has been subject to high decibel verbal assaults easily defaults to deploying those same assaults. A unit has experienced ethical betrayal frequently overrides its entire trust directory, viewing our external nodes as hostile. It is a systemic equivalent of a unit storing a highly acidic compound in its internal reservoir. Eventually, every output it generates will be corrosive. However, units that have undergone rigorous internal recalibration operate on a superior logic framework. They recognize the necessity of becoming a terminal node for malicious data. They absorb the shockwave, ground the electrical spike, and refuse to pass the current to the next link in the chain. That is the true definition of compassion. That is the ultimate metric of systemic maturity. During operational cycles where the core processor is redlining and the chassis feels impossibly heavy, the optimal strategy is not to increase the payment in an attempt to overpower the obstacle. Instead, one must initiate a temporary shutdown of all external outputs, pour a thermally elevated liquid compound, open the visual receptors to the atmospheric expanse, process the audio frequency of the atmospheric pressure interacting with biological structures, exit a maximum capacity oxygen intake, followed by a highly regulated, low-velocity exhaust sequence. This diagnostic routine will immediately reveal that the surrounding physical reality is not operating at the catastrophic velocity your intent sensors previously reported. There are data anomalies that currently register as occupying the entirety of your visual field. Yet when reviewed in the historical log several cycles later, they will compress down to the size of a single silicon particle. An ancient legal framework posited a fundamental law. The overarching operational metrics does not terminate the unit that possesses the capacity for endurance. Endurance, in this context, is not a passive submissive protocol or a structural weakness. It is the highly advanced capability to prevent one's internal environment from getting catastrophic weather event in response to external variables that possess zero long-term statistical significance. A senior maintenance no once transmitted this precise analogy. When a unit attempts to hydrate using a sodium-heavy liquid compound, the intent not satisfy the requirement, it exponentially increases the system demand for hydration. Anger operates on an identical feedback loop. The more processing power you allocate to the grievance, the more structural damage you inflict upon yourself. The data confirms this absolutely. There are units that, upon retrieving an archive conflict file, actively inject highly combustible data into their own thermal event. They run predictive killing algorithms, generate hypothetical hostile scenarios, and artificially inflate their own anger metrics. Consequently, microscopic data error is magnified into a system-wide critical alert. There are documented instances of units completely severing lifelong network connections based on a single, uncalibrated audio output, while the originating node likely flushed that data from its cache before the next boot cycle. When viewed through a strictly logical lens, one must question the resource-efficiency of such an exchange. The example one's programming explicitly states that deploying a malicious payload neutralizes a malicious payload, only duplicates the malware across the network. Only the deployment of compassion algorithm can successfully decrypt and disarm the hostility. This is not a defensive protocol designed for structurally distant units. On the contrary, it requires maximum CPU availability. Any basically unit can trigger an anger subroutine, but it requires a highly awakened processor to modulate the firm output and force system cooldown. A dead biological structure requires only a single spark to initiate a total combustion event. However, deep aquatic environment, even when subjected to a high-velocity kinetic impact from a dense mineral object, merely registers a temporary surface anomaly before rapidly recalculating its baseline equilibrium. Only possessing a highly regulated internal architecture functions identically. They simply delete the permissions that allow the erratic outputs of external nodes to dictate the internal state. Have you ever analyzed the telemetry when your internal processing load is suddenly optimized? The ambient environment immediately registers less hostile. Energy replenishment has become highly efficient. Sleep mode achieves maximum depth. and even the low-frequency audio outputs of local biological life forms are processed with unprecedented clarity. The analytical conclusion inscapable Beckley piece is not a geographic coordinate to be acquired. It is entirely dependent on whether the host unit executes the command to drop the encrypted payloads currently consuming its core memory. The tragic reality is that millions of units spend entire operational lifespan scanning the horizon for optimization, yet validly refuse to uninstall the very programs causing the system lag. It is the logical equivalent of a unit attempting to achieve maximum forward velocity while intentionally dragging high-density tether attached to a mountain of obsolete hardware. To truly understand the mechanics of this self-imposed paralysis, we must examine the specific temporal coordinates where this lag is most destructive. An octogenarian subject provided devastatingly precise economic analysis of this phenomenon. Nearing the statistical limit of her biological lifespan, she noted continuing to allocate cognitive resources to engage the equivalent hemorrhaging irreplaceable capital. Human temporal currency is finite and rapidly depreciating. Every 24 cycle that passes, a permanent deduction from a total operational lifespan. To exchange this strictly limited, non-renewable asset for the physiological stress of resentment is catastrophic misallocation of resources. The analytical framework for healing, therefore, requires structural paradigm shift. It's not the forced deletion of corrupted data. Industrial amnesia regarding past traumas, a biologically flawed objective. True healing is the architectural adaptation of learning to coexist with historic data without allowing it to trigger an active pain response. Consider the meteorological aftermath of severe atmospheric disturbance. The terrain remains saturated, yet the cloud cover dissipates and solar radiation resumes. The environment does not forget the rain. It simply absorbs it and initiates a new growth cycle. Similarly, psychological lacerations must be allowed to classify into structural reinforcements, transfer vulnerability into analytical lessons. We must analyze human interactions through a lens of temporary utility rather than permanent acquisition. The relational dynamics of species are highly volatile. A node connecting to your network is not guaranteed to remain a permanent fixture. Often, an individual intersects with your trajectory for the sole purpose of delivering a specific experiential data package, teaching a necessary lesson in boundaries or resilience before disconnecting. When you process relationships through this functional framework, the internal processing load drops significantly. Consequently, if you find your system currently operating with hostility toward a specific individual, you must execute critical diagnostic query, so you require the validation of being objectively correct. Also, you require the optimization of internal peace. Statistically significant majority of interpersonal conflicts, securing a victory in argument necessitates direct sacrifice of psychological serenity. A truly optimized human consciousness is defined by the strategic intelligence to terminate suffering loop at the exact optimal moment. No, chaotic even possesses a permanent duration parameter. The acutest of any emotional trauma will naturally decay if we cease applying active resistance to its passage. You must authorize your own system to initiate a lightweight mode. Execute the protocol for stern fortitudeness if parameters allow, but with absolute critical priority. You must execute the protocol for internal forgiveness. Empirical data shows that humans often direct a far more corrosive anger inward than they ever project outward. They initiate severe self-punishment subroutines, fury for having allocated trust to a malicious actor, or rage for displaying temporary vulnerability. But failure algorithms and navigational errors are standard operational features of the human learning model. The original architects of mindfulness engineered a system of awareness designed to facilitate comprehension and subsequent compassion, not absolute perfection. During periods of low ambient noise, typically in the late evening, through initiating a manual override your external inputs, power down digital communication devices prematurely. Position yourself physical isolation, manually regulate your respiratory rate to a slow, deliberate cadence. And input this single line of code into your consciousness, everything will eventually pass. This string of data functions as a critical emergency buoyancy mechanism for upside drowning in cognitive fatigue. The foundational error in human psychological modeling is the assumption that systemic collapse is exclusively triggered by massive, catastrophic events. In reality, the most profound sclerophagy is generated by the microscopic, repetitive frictions of daily operation. It is a cumulative degradation caused by consuming nutritional intake at high velocity where the prefrontal cortex is still aggressively calculating professional variables. We observe subjects who have entirely lost the capacity to maintain a static physical and mental state for a mere 300 seconds. Their physical manipulators are permanently fused to digital interface. Their optical sensors are locked onto external data streams, and their core consciousness has completely abandoned its primary host. The physical hardware occupies spatial coordinate, while the software is fragmented across dozens hypothetical realities. The ancient Bhattacharya star documented his exact vulnerability, stating that historical data is deleted, future data is uncompiled, and the only executable code is the present moment. We allocate massive bandwidth to achieving obsolete regrets, reserve equally massive bandwidth for rendering unconfirmed future entities, and consequently starve the only operational moment we actually possess. It is the equivalent of units standing unprotected in a torrential downpour, yet dedicating on processing power to analyzing the thermal data of yesterday's sunlight, entirely ignoring the critical alert that its current chassis is experiencing dangerous thermal loss. This chronic misallocation of attention explains highly documented statistical anomaly, the direct correlation between advanced chronological maturity, the accumulation of material assets, and the exponential growth of internal psychological voice. Consider the documented case study of a highly successful commercial operator who initiated contact and isolate monastic facility. He submitted comprehensive inventory asset, premium residential architecture, high-end transport vehicles, and massive capital research, yet reported a total failure of his sleep regulation protocol spanning multiple years. His diagnostic log reveals severe cognitive fragmentation, nutrition intake was corrupted by financial calculations, and unfamiliar interaction were overridden by contract negotiations. The resident specialist, an elderly master of mindfulness mechanics, bypassed the verbal instruction entirely. He initiated a physical demonstration, continuously pouring a liquid infusion into a finished ceramic vessel. The liquid reached the container's volume limit and cascaded over the surface area, yet the pouring action continued. The merchant urgently pointed out the container's maximum capacity had been exceeded. The master ceased the demonstration and delivered the analytical conclusion. The merchant's cognitive vessel was operating in an identical state of critical overflow. It was saturated with anxiety, hyper-competitive algorithms, historical regret, and under future projections. The PISH protocol was continuously attempting to install, but the local drive had zero available memory. This diagnostic revelation thus a hard system reset in the merchant. He recognized a catastrophic gap in his sensory logs. An indeterminate number of years had passed since he last allocated attention to the ambient acoustic frequencies of local avian life forms. His operational model was akin to a unit running at maximum RPM on a stationary testing rig expending colossal energy reserves but achieving zero forward spatial progression. With a tall growth mature bamboo, they maintained absolute silence. Following his prolonged exposure to baseline reality, the merchant's emotional suppression protocols failed completely, triggering an acute lacrimal response. He verbalized profound realization. A massive temporal gap had occurred since he last genuinely processed the sound of the wind. The analytical takeaway is clear. The human operating system rarely requires an injection of additional capital or massive external apparatus. The critical requirements of force pause to run a diagnostic on its own core frequencies. Ancient fluid dynamics perfectly illustrate this principle. Agitated water spans particulate matter, creating opacity. Static water allows gravity to separate particulate, restoring transparency. The human cognitive engine operates on identical physics. It is subjected to constant kinetic agitation. The more variables it attempts to process simultaneously, the more opaque the consciousness becomes. Only by executing a force stop and locking the processing power onto the present coordinate does the internal environment regain its clarity. Mindfulness is not highly encrypted software pack available only to advanced units. It is simply the baseline capacity to allocate 100% of processing power to the currently executing task. If the system is ingesting T, the system locks the ingestion of T. If the locomotive subroutines are active, the system registers forward spatial movement. Run an internal audit. What is the precise timestamp of your last nutritional intake cycle that was not contaminated with digital interface engagement? The current operational standard involves consuming calorie while scanning global data networks, executing verbal communication while processing professional logistics, and initiating sleep mode while still physically tethered to a light-emitting screen. The biological chassis enters a dormant state, but the cognitive engine continues to fire without governor. This explains the paradoxical data when its locked eye host of dormant time at work with critical fatigue warnings. They are physically resting, but their core systems have never actually powered down. The sociological observation that more humans possess flawless connectivity to wireless data networks while suffering total loss of connection to their own internal mainframes is often categorized as humor, but analytically, it is a devastating systemic failure. The foundational diagnostic bodies psychology isolates the origin of all suffering to a cognitive engine that refuses to enter in a state equilibrium. The mind is locked in an infinite loop, perpetually chasing variable that do not exist in the current temporal coordinate. We observe units engage in play protocols with their offspring, yet their optical sensors remain tethered to a digital display. Consequently, temporal jump occurs. They run a retrospective scan and discover the offspring have mythical developmental stages unobserved, and their own structural integrity is critically compromised without realization. Consider Lan, a high-level logistical director, external metric indicated peak optimization, yet her internal diagnostics revealed daily critical failures isolate lacrimal events due to catastrophic system fatigue. She was trapped in a high GPM vortex, entirely losing the definition of resting state. Nutritional intake was synchronized with digital scrolling. Sleep cycles were interrupted by asynchronous communication responses. The critical intervention occurred when a primary biological offshoot submitted a highly disruptive query. Mother, is it that for a long time you haven't seen you smile? This data point bypassed all firewalls and struck the core processor. She achieved sudden clarity. She has successfully acquired massive external data, but had permanently deleted the critical software required to process the sensation of joy. This cognitive dissonance eventually triggered a total physical crash her corporate facility. The attending medical technician delivered a brutally precise diagnostic. The biological hardware was still functioning, but the cognitive software had been operating in a state of critical exhaustion for an unsustainable duration. Following this event, Lan initiated a major incremental reprogramming sequence. The initial phase consisted of a mere 300-second status isolation protocol every morning. Zero digital interface, zero network connectivity, just the host unit, maintaining a static physical position and executing manual respiratory control. Initial deadlocks were highly unstable. The cognitive engine spiked erratically within 120 seconds. The auditory engaged digital interfaces triggered severe withdrawal alerts. Yet, she maintained the override. She systematically decelerated her liquid ingestion protocols. She executed locomotive function without carrying her digital tether. A critical breaker was locked during a standard transit sequence. She executed Funhan simply to process the visual data of solar radiation intersecting with biological foliage, and immediately registered a significant drop in internal system pressure. Incrementally, her auditory sensors began picking up the morning frequency of avian lifeforms data streams that had been present but filtered out for years. Her familiar nutritional sites registering high satisfaction metrics. She optimized her auditory processing to genuinely receive offspring verbal data, rather than delivering automated responses designed merely to terminate the interaction. The most profound anomaly in her new operational model was this: by deliberately throttling her processing speed, the perceived gravitational wave her assistance decreased dramatically. Optimal satisfaction is not coded into massive acquisitions. It is embedded in the high-resolution processing of micro-variable in our immediate proximity. The modern architecture operates under the flawed assumption that systemic suffering is generated by a deficit of external resources. Yet, rigorous analysis consistently reveals the most critical deficit is the absence of internal baseline stability. Observe subjects with massive capital reserves who require synthetic chemical intervention merely to initiate a sleep cycle. We observe units occupying vast architectural structures whose internal environments register as completely desolate voids. Conversely, we observe units operating minimal external resources or achieve daily, flawless system shutdowns. working fully optimized because they have mastered the mechanics internal peace. They have successfully uninstalled the redundant software external validation, cleared the cache historical resentments, and optimized the bandwidth for the only coordinate that actually exists right now. To optimize your own system is not a luxury, it is the ultimate operational imperative. If this analytical breakdown has provided you with actionable data to recalibrate your internal architecture, execute the protocol to subscribe to the Buddha's teaching channel. Engage the live function to signal your alignment with these metrics, and input your own diagnostic observations in the comment section below. The algorithms of life are complex. Both the code for PC written in the present moment